And now, basically, the team doesn't exist. I think the head of it has left. Yeah, both heads of it have left, Jan and Ilya. That's been the news of the last week. What happened? Why did the thing break down?
I think OpenAI sort of decided to take things in a somewhat different direction.
Meaning what? I mean, that super alignment isn't the best way to frame the...
No, I mean, look, obviously, sort of after the November board events, there were personnel changes. I think Ilya leaving was just incredibly tragic for OpenAI. And, I think some amount of reprioritization, I think some amount of, there's been some reporting on the super alignment compute commitment. There's this 20% compute commitment as part of, how a lot of people were recruited. It's like, we're going to do this ambitious effort in alignment. And, some amount of, not keeping that and deciding to go in a different direction.
Okay, so now Jan has left, Ilya has left. So this team itself has dissolved, but you were the sort of first person who left or was forced to leave. The information reported that you were fired for leaking. What happened? Is this accurate?
Yeah. Look, why don't I tell you what they claim I leaked and you can tell me what you think. So OpenAI did claim to employees that I was fired for leaking. And I and others have sort of pushed them to say what the leak is. And so here's their response in full. Sometime last year, I had written a sort of brainstorming document on preparedness, on safety and security measures we need in the future on the path to AGI. And I shared that with 3 external researchers for feedback. So that's it. That's the leak. I think for context, it was totally normal at OpenAI at the time to share sort of safety ideas with external researchers for feedback. It happened all the time. The doc was sort of my ideas. Before I shared it, I reviewed it for anything sensitive. The internal version had a reference to a future cluster, but I redacted that for the external copy. There's a link in there to some slides of mine, internal slides. But that was a dead link to the external people I shared it with. The slides weren't shared with them. And so look, obviously I pressed them to sort of tell me what is the confidential information in this document. And what they came back with was a line in the doc about planning for AGI by 27, 28, and that setting timelines for preparedness. I wrote this doc, a couple months after the super alignment announcement. We had put out, this sort of 4-year planning horizon. I didn't think that planning horizon was sensitive. It's the sort of thing Sam says publicly all the time. I think sort of John said it on the podcast,
he said it on my podcast
a couple weeks ago. Anyway, so that's it.
That's it? So that seems pretty thin for, if the cause was leaking, that seems pretty thin. Was there anything else to it?
Yeah, so that was the leaking claim. I can say a bit more about sort of what happened in the firing. So one thing was last year I had written a internal memo about OpenAI security. I thought it was egregiously insufficient. I thought it wasn't sufficient to protect the theft of model weights or key algorithmic secrets from foreign actors. So I wrote this memo. I shared it with a few colleagues, a couple members of leadership who sort of mostly said it was helpful. But then, a couple weeks later, a sort of major security incident occurred. And that prompted me to share the memo with a couple members of the board. And so after I did that, days later, it was made very clear to me that leadership was very unhappy with me having shared this memo with the board. Apparently the board had hassled leadership about security. And then I got sort of an official HR warning for this memo, for sharing it with the board. The HR person told me it was racist to worry about CCP espionage. And they said it was sort of unconstructive. And look, I think I probably wasn't at my most diplomatic. I definitely could have been more politically savvy. But I thought it was a really, really important issue. And, the security incident had made me really worried. Anyway, and so I guess the reason I bring this up is when I was fired, it was sort of made very explicit that the security memo was a major reason for my being fired. I think it was something like, the reason that this is a firing and not a warning is because of the security memo.